Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call this study session to order, and we're going to start with the adoption of the agendas. Are there any changes?
No.
All right, and
Motion to adopt the agenda. Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, at this time, then, we're just going to skip our moment of silence and the pledge, and don't have any calls to the public, so we're just going straight to the consent agenda. Are there any items that we need to discuss at this time? Seeing none, need a motion?
Move to adopt the consent agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Okay, so this time we're moving right along to 5, our governing board study session, and there are 5 things on our study session. We have a student enrollment, a demographics study update, budget implications, a governing board retreat, and policy manual review. So this time, let's go ahead and we'll let Ms. Sagata-Jones start our study session.
Yes, good evening, Madam President, members of the board. We're happy to be here this evening to talk about the items in the study session. The first one that some of these all go into the same presentation we'll be doing this evening. We'll talk about, you have another sheet in front of you that looks like this, and what we're going to cover in part of our presentation is the current student enrollment, the projected student enrollment, the financial overview, financial implications, plan to increase student enrollment, and next steps. On B, you'll see where it says demographic study update. We have currently reached out to the demographer to conduct another study so that we do have current numbers. As you know from the one in the past, that's where we had the decline in birth rate. And then we just want to make sure that we have fresh data in front of us, so that is underway. And then the budget implications and student enrollment will fall under to the study session here. We had talked about how the best way to present this information. And so you have a one sheet in front of you. I've identified what we're going to talk about. Is that me?
Or is that mine on and it does it, so I'll just turn it on and off.
Oh, okay. If you'll look underneath that, it says the current reality. In a nutshell, that's what it is, but we're going to spend time going through a presentation of how did we get to that current reality and what it means. So the current reality is there's $1 million shortfall. There is a negative $3,290,190 structural deficit. There's a $1.2 million decrease due to 212 decrease in ADM, and then the reduced RCL and MO override. And there's a negative $421,271 in additional expenses. And there's a negative $92,000 in the loss of district additional assistance as a result of the lower enrollment in fiscal year 19. So what we're going to do is go ahead, and Mr. Berrigan has provided a couple documents for us. One is an executive summary. That's just everything that he's going to discuss in his PowerPoint presentation, and it'll just give you some key points that you can digest later on. And then we'll go through into the PowerPoint, and that's where we'll have our discussions. I think Mr. Berrigan would like to approach it with, if you have a question during the time in which he has the slide up, let's just take time and answer those questions at that time. Okay?
May I ask you a question, a clarifying question? I heard you earlier say something about I was paying attention but didn't hear. We hired a consultant or not?
We have a demographer we use in the past. We've used him, and we want to make sure that we have current numbers out there. Mm-hmm.
So you talked about the birth rate. So are we conducting that, are we collecting that data or data mining similar to other schools our size and similar demographics? Are we doing that?
The demographic study gives us our entire Glendale. He does the city of Glendale, so that's where the birth rate came from. And then he does in there, we have comparisons of the decrease in student enrollment of other districts around, but he's given us the entire city of Glendale and then focuses on our school district. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But demographics that mirror ours other districts? I mean, because Glendale could have different districts, obviously,
Let's make sure you're,
but the, it's kind of the, so, are we using are we using data that, or demographics that are similar to ours, that mirror ours? Roosevelt could be one, so not necessarily in Glendale, but those that mirror ours.
Well, I think the data that we have represents Glendale, but I think what you'll see and what we've looked at neighboring districts, and we've looked at what their enrollment is in neighboring districts, yes. And we've looked not only at neighboring districts, but also neighboring charter schools. And there's a slide on here that shows the difference between the enrollments over the last couple of years. I can't remember what year we started, last couple of years, and where we are compared to them. And then we would know if, I think off the top of our heads even, we know if there's similar demographic, meaning socioeconomic. We know that from the other studies we do with assessments results and that. So I would say yes, that is part of that, based on the information that we have, but we haven't gone out and said, okay, is the birth rate in Glendale, is the decrease in birth rate in Glendale happened in 2016. So those children haven't come yet, the kindergartners. But do I know if there was a decline in birth rate in Phoenix? I haven't done that out of the city of Glendale.
So I would be interested in that, in demographics that mirror ours. I'm just wondering if that's just happening in Glendale, period, in our other school districts, finding the same, and then the impact is their budget. So I don't know what that costs to add to that, or if there's no cost, I'd be interested. I would be, I don't know if the rest of the board is, but I think it would be interesting to do
Okay.
that. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Talk to Mr. Brown. Mr. Barrett.
Madam President, members of the board, I'd like to start off with just recapping the changes in the budget from the late summer to more recently in December. And so the slide before you is taking a comparison, again, the adopted budget to the revised, and that occurred in early December. And just on the surface, or overall, you're talking about a $73.5 million change to 71.5. And this next slide is an attempt to identify what's happening when the enrollment decreases. The budget back in the late summer was created using 11,904 students. When we revised in December, we used the 40th day count, because again, that's the most current number that we have available. That data reflected an ADM of 11,305. So two things happen there. The lower ADM decreases the revenue control limit, and it also reduces the M&O override calculation. The M&O override calculation is 15% of the revenue control limit. So as that number goes down, your M&O override amount decreases as well. The combined amount between your revenue control limit and the M&O override in just that decrease to the 40th day count is, and I'm going to round here, about $3.3 million just in that figure alone. And again, that's in the current year. What I want to make sure that we all understand is the M&O override. That was obviously a lot of a discussion because we had that as our November initiative or a question on the ballot. The extension of the M&O override mitigates any financial hardship. So in the most simplest form, if we had not passed the M&O override this November, you're adding about $9 million into the shortfall for next year. So it's not new money. Want to make sure that we make that clear. It's to continue existing programs. So again, it's not new money, but we wanted to take the time to make sure that we all understood that. And we've relied heavily on the M&O override for the last 15 years. This snapshot is just an example, or it's a reflection of how we've used that M&O override in the latest school year, so in 2018. This next slide, I want to talk briefly about the budget balance carry forward. when we adopted the budget in the summer, the carry forward was calculated at about $2.6 million. When all the bills were paid, when all the purchase orders were closed, that number increased by about $1.3 million, which gave us $4,017,000, okay? That's an increase of about $1.3 million from where the carry forward was first calculated to where it really was when we revised the budget.
Can I ask a question right there?
Yes, please.
How do you have such a big discrepancy? I mean, is it your existing, what you're expecting to pay? Do you already have like a set amount kind of earmarked for certain bills, but then they actually were less than?
That's correct. That's really the shortest answer. And so what we look at when we're building the budget, we look in visions, we look at our year-to-date expenses, we look at pre-encumbrances and encumbrances, because we have to assume, because throughout the entire district, we have open purchase orders and or part of our salary expenses. So when we've closed those out, what we thought just, for example, was $100 might have been only $20.
Okay.
But in the system, it has to reflect that entire expense. And that's probably a small example, and you can apply that to salary and benefits as well. But that is a great summary.
So let me just, another question similar to that one. So I'm a little confused. You had a budget, and then when you went to go close POs and close out all your expenditures, how did we increase? If you already budgeted for that money, some of that money was just encumbered. You may have used it all in some POs, some you encumbered and didn't use it, put it back. So how did we get it?
So when we look at the system, we think we're going to have just say $1,000 worth of expenses. Okay. When you close out those POs and all that gets actually paid, instead of $1,000, maybe it was $600. So I have $400 more than what we anticipated.
More?
That's correct.
I thought I just said, when you said increase, that you meant increase in?
The carry forward increase, so there was a greater savings than initially projected when we looked into the system or looked at the system in the summer. I hope that answers the question.
It does.
This next slide is really an attempt to show you there was a decrease in the revenue control limit and the M&O override, which again, I'm rounding about $3.3 million, but because we received an increase in the budget balance carry forward, the net change was just shy of $2 million. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure that checking for understanding. And so when you look at what happened from the adopted to the revision, it feels only like we reduced the budget by $2 million. The $3.3 million figure, that's going to be an important figure as we get down through the presentation, so please keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that the reason we were able to reduce that decrease was because of the budget balance carry forward. So that's going to be an important piece as we go through the presentation. So again, just wanted to recap that the budget was adopted at $73.5 million and how we're currently at 71.5 or 71.6. So hopefully that's given you an understanding of how the budget has changed in 4 or 5 months. And when we revise, as a side note, when we revise in May, we will be using the 100th day, which was just yesterday, to see if that number has changed. And that could be up or down. And so we'll be looking at that once that information becomes available. So hopefully that's giving you an understanding of the changes within the M&O budget. If there are no questions, I'm going to briefly talk about the unrestricted capital piece. The change from the adopted budget to the revised budget in December is probably the smallest change. You're seeing about $120,000 change roughly, and the change really also occurred in the budget balance carry forward. So we had anticipated expenses in capital that weren't materialized, and so there was a little bit more money than we expected, and that's pretty common. So you're going to see what that change was from July to December. you've heard me, I think in December, you heard me talk a little bit about the district additional assistance. That formula is not current year funding. That calculation still takes the prior year funding methodology into account. So the loss in students from the higher number to the lower number, we're not going to feel that decrease in revenue until the subsequent year, because the district additional assistance formula requires the prior year information. So you're going to see, if everything were to stay equal, you would see a $92,000 decrease in next year's budget. Does that make sense?
Okay, so my question for you, okay, so you're showing us the information, which we've seen for a while about our 40-day, our decrease, but obviously we're at 100 days, so there's, 60 days in between, 40 and 60, and so we're just barely discussing this, and so I kind of have concerns about our current year funding and how, as a board, that we can better be on top of our shortfalls and that the decisions are made a little bit more current instead of by past practices, because past practices, doesn't seem like we can really do it the same way that we used to. So you have any?
Madam President, members of the board, I'm going to address that towards the end of the presentation. And I'm going to continue to quote one of my neighboring colleagues. Current year funding is bad, it's real bad. You're hitting a moving target, and that's the most difficult piece. And I'll elaborate that towards the end. But current year funding I think makes it very difficult for any school district that is either staying flat or decreasing to anticipate any financial challenges. And I'll talk about that towards the end, because I think that's really a conversation the board may have to be solvent and sustain itself and meet the challenges that we will be facing, not just this year, but over the next couple of years. So I'm happy to address that and elaborate that towards the end. Some of these slides should be very familiar to you. It's the same format from prior years. The information, a good chunk of it is something that has already been presented to you, but we felt that it was important that we just reiterate and continue to talk about the district additional assistance. If the formula were fully funded, we would generate about $5.3 million. This is the first year that there is a restoration of those cuts. This reduction is about $3.4, $3.5 million, which represents more about a 65% reduction, where in prior years, we've always used 85, for Glendale was more like 87%. But with the restoration in the formula, it allowed us to have about $1 million more in capital. To keep it in perspective and to continue to talk about the issues in capital, from about 2009 to 2019, the district has lost just shy of $40 million. About 36.5 of that represents capital funding. And I think you guys have heard me talk about the example that I give. The loss in capital funding would represent almost like building 2 brand new elementary schools, just to put it in perspective.
That was money we were expecting, not what we received the year previous.
No, that is a true reduction in funding, which is separate than the rollover, which is statewide about $1 billion. For us, it's anywhere from $17 to $18 million, and that's a true IOU, monies that we should be receiving this year, that paid in a subsequent year. And that is different, but it's also a challenge for Arizona school districts. So again, just wanted to recap from the M&O and the capital what has happened in 4 or 5 months. This slide is to give the board and the community and anyone out there an understanding of taking a snapshot, because we can't just focus on what's happening within our 17 schools. We really need to be looking with what's happening around us. And this data, I'm not sure exactly how we started talking about it, but we started to track this information. When you look at the 100th day for the 3 charters that are on your screen, and you compare what their 100th day was in 2018, which was just this last year that ended, collectively or combined, they increased about 512 students. If you take that same timeline, so comparing 17 to 18 for Glendale Elementary, we lost 509 students.
Which one's ours?
I'm sorry.
100-day.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Great question. That should answer it. I know, I'm going off the hard copy, so thank you.
Oh, we're not on this.
No, sorry. But there's a direct correlation between what we're losing and what the charter schools within our boundaries or near our boundaries are increasing. Now, that's not the only reason. You've heard the superintendent talk about birth rates, and that's a factor. And that's you're gonna see how that's gonna impact our district over the next several years. But there's a direct correlation there. And I think that's important to truly understand, and understanding the competition, the marketing strategies, and what they're doing, because it's clearly impacting us.
So let me interject here. So I'm 100% in agreement that these schools are taking our children. But for the average person, looking for this board, what instrument have we used to know in facts that though our students are going there, or because it's an assumption that they're going there? So how do we know that those amount of kids were gonna come here and they took them?
That's a great question. The correlation that I'm drawing is strictly on the numbers. Interviewing or doing an exit interview, I think could be something that we look into, but just from a numbers game, there's a direct correlation, and I'm going to provide you some other slides that hopefully you guys will reach that same conclusion as well. That's not to say that we couldn't do other things to speak to those parents and find out why, but just from a numbers game, I want to show you what we're looking at so that hopefully that draws some correlation there.
These locations are closest to us.
Yes. I will point out that the second school on that list, I believe it was sometime last year, they were located just next to the Bank of America, the Methodist church there. And sometime last year they moved to off the I-17 in Glendale or something like that. But every morning, or at least half of the mornings when I drive into work, I see their bus right off 51st Avenue and Glendale. So I know that they're busing the kids that live within our boundaries to their location. So I kept them as a sample because it's still impacting us. And I'm gonna show you other numbers, other information that hopefully kind of just puts things in perspective.
Mr. Berrigan? Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we know how long each of these have been open? For how long?
Sort of, and I'll walk you through that a little bit and why I say it that way.
Mr. Bergen also, and Mr. O'Donnell makes a good point that we make some assumptions. We have asked that our principals start to do some of those exit interviews, and we do know, for example, at some of our schools, I think Mr. Parcells has done a good job. At Jack, we do know that some of his Jack kids are going to the Math and Science Academy. Sometimes they just see them walking there, and then some families do come in and say that they're going to those charter schools. And then it's pretty clear that the bus at 51st Avenue in Glendale are picking up our kids too. But we need to get a better handle on exactly when students leave, where are they going? Are they leaving the district? Are they going to another district? Or are they going into the charter schools?
Now, we would be getting records requests on behalf, at least if they're a currently enrolled student. Wouldn't that also be kind of an indicator of where they went?
Madam President, members of the board, in the withdrawal slip, it will say like a transfer out, unless we're probably manually tracking that. I would imagine we're probably giving copies or giving them a hard copy to the parents, and then they're taking that to the new school, whatever school that might be. So other than knowing that they're withdrawing, going to another school.
They're not required to tell us where they're going, or are we required to record it? We want to start tracking that ourselves.
Okay.
Well, so for me, there's two things I spoke of it another time. So there's a number of how many students we've lost. We know that. That's pretty factual. We know that number. And that's important to me because That's what we need to focus on. And then there's the assumption of where they went. Now, that may not be that important, but when they're going to the charter schools, that's important information to have, and that's the information I want to see, because, so for a community to rally around a public school, they need to be convinced these kids are going here, and this is why we have a reduction in our budget, here's why class size is going to be increasing. So that's why, I know the numbers are factual, but where they're going, it sounds like we might get there, but that's really, in a nutshell, what I'm looking for.
Madam President, members of the board, this next slide is really our district's ADM going back to 2001, and then 2019 is the 40th day. So every year prior to 2019 is the 100th day. The 2019 data is 40th day. Our enrollment today is lower than it was in 2001. And just to give you another different perspective, in 2001, we didn't have, I think it was Desert Spirit or Sunset Vista. So it's, you know, when you're looking at that trend, that's alarming. If you could turn to the two-page document, and it's really the second page, legislative and voter highlights, and then just maybe perhaps using that as a guide and using the average daily membership concerns, just as a point of reference. In 2016, that's when, in May of 2016, that's when voters had the opportunity to vote yes or no on Prop 123. We had the support of the state. In 2017, that was the first year that current year funding was required to be implemented. But for declining districts, there was a hold harmless clause. In other words, if your enrollment in 2017 was lower, school districts were given the opportunity to default to the prior year and not feel the decrease in enrollment. So you're talking about, you know, roughly 450-ish that we would have been by law required to reduce our budget, but because the law was written in a way that they did not want to harm districts that were declining, it just automatically defaulted to the prior year ADM. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. 2017, 2018, those were the years where inflation, it started in 2016, 2017, 2018, where inflation was starting to be funded again because of the settlement and Prop 123. 19, obviously, for this year, there was the increase, probably the most significant increase in a very long time, and that's going to continue to allow for the 20 by 20 initiative and then any inflation. 2019 was also the year, which is the current year, in which capital, through a 5-year phase-in, is starting to be restored. So just wanted to provide you those legislative and voter-approved highlights. I think that's important to kind of understand what's happened in the last several years. Obviously, in this current fiscal year, our voters supported both the bond and the M&O override. This last legislative session, they extended Prop 301. That would have been another deficit for the district because we use a good portion of that into base salaries. So again, just trying to put things in perspective so that hopefully you can see that big picture and know how some of those decisions, you know, what decisions occurred in what year and what that might have done to the district. This next slide is an attempt to show you some other charters in the area. And then we thought, well, what does that mean for our nearby or other elementary school districts? So this slide obviously has Glendale Elementary on the top, but every LEA, which is local education agency, whether district or charter, is below it alphabetically. And this is probably going to be the most telling, and it's on page 8 of your hard copy. Same data, just sorted differently. Glendale's on top, and then it's sorted by the difference in ADM. We spent time looking at Cartwright, Pendergast, Alhambra, Washington. Those are the nearby districts that kind of border us. To Board Member Wilson's question about do we know when some of these schools started, we just went back to 2014, so if you see a 0, they were not open in that year. And that's why my response was sort of, we kind of know based on when we have data. If you look at Glendale, you're looking at shy of 600 kids from 100th day last year to 40th day. That analysis was done for every school that's obviously on the slide. Cartwright is down 1,437 students. Then followed by Pendergast, 683, Alhambra, 567, Washington, 520. And then, ironically, all the charters, they have a positive. You know, I think, to Mr. Aldama's question, I don't know that we have all the answers, but we have data, right? We have data that there is something happening that's not isolated to Glendale, that our nearby districts are also encountering a decrease in enrollment for whatever reason.
Those kids were somewhere other than a charter school at some point.
They were in the prior year, when they ended in May, they were at those district schools, and so you're seeing that decrease. I think that's important that we understand what's happening around us, because that should help us address, hopefully be on top of some of these challenges that we're going to encounter even moving forward.
Mr. Bergen, also, Mr. O'Donnell, the question you had asked earlier, some of the, at least the first and the third and part of the second, and that are these districts do have similar demographics. They would have similar different demographics to our district.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's a great point.
Yeah, these would be the similar ones.
Madam President, members of the board, and this is the information that we do know of. What's the challenge is we don't always know when the charter school is popping up until they're breaking ground. And so that's the disadvantage that we have. That's a disadvantage also in the demographic study, that the analysis is looking at what information we know. But when a charter school in particular pops up, we're only noticing it when we're seeing groundbreaking signs or invites or whatever the case may be.
Or they send emails to our employees asking them to apply for jobs.
Yeah,
That's right.
you know, I
They're
think
sending
that's unfortunate, because I think when a decision is made for a charter school to open up, that the public schools in the area should be part of that discussion, you know, part of that.
So why doesn't the school district, freedom of the Public Act, so why don't you just implement on a monthly basis, ask the city of Glendale for a public records request if there are any permits or any zoning applicants for charter schools? Do this on a monthly basis. It's like going fishing. You're going to find, eventually you're going to catch a fish, so do that on a monthly basis. You want to know, and it's they're going to give it right to you. Yes, no, 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 yes, bingo, we got it. Start planning ahead. So
That's a great suggestion.
so you guys should do that, because it's a right all of us as individuals have, but the school district has that right. So
That's a great suggestion. I wish we had some connections to the city of Phoenix as well. If you look at the Great Hearts Academy Maryville, they're about 48th Avenue and Camelback. So between the Home Depot and the QT, that's obviously technically Phoenix. They were at a previous location, and I believe it was this year they opened up at their new location.
Right.
So some of their data, if you look at them, they opened wherever they originally started, 187 kids. But from their 100th day last year at their previous location to their new location, they increased, I think that's 108 students. They're right on the border, right? So the question becomes, are they targeting our southeast boundaries? There's another neighboring district that would be their northwestern boundaries, right? So strategically, they're putting themselves in areas that there's overlap of districts, right? Or where they have at least a good 1 or 2 mile radius where they're busing. You have another one, which we know is on Glendale and 45th. In my mind, that's Glendale, that's Washington, that's Alhambra, maybe a little bit of Cartwright.
Part of Cartwright.
So that's a challenge, but I love Mr. Aldama's suggestion. And then obviously there's Phoenix, right? Phoenix is nearby, but it's right on that border. And that's a challenge, and so I do appreciate that suggestion. I think that's a good one. But again, it puts it in perspective of what's happening around us. Please keep in mind, I want you to at least kind of keep this visual, because we're going to talk a little bit about how this is current year funding is a moving target. ADM projections are a moving target, and I want you to take that, because I want to expand on that a little bit later as well.
You actually just said there are a couple schools in here that have moved locations. So, if I'm going to market what's positive about my public schools, is my public schools are staying in the same place, and we're probably not going to be moving, as a surprise to you, which they are allowed to do. Oh, surprise, we're going.
Surprise, we're running out of money, we shut down,
Yeah.
we are locked down.
Madam President, members of the board, this next slide is just a projection of some of the increases that we do know of as of right now. We know that state retirement is increasing. We provided a calculation on what that might look like. Utility cost, again, just a projection. And then the implementation of Prop 206 from $11 to $12. That is a calculation for the entire year, and so that's about $153,000. But you add those all together, right? And, you're shy of $500,000 right there. So you take the shortage in revenue and added expenses and treat that as a shortage, right? As a shortfall. Actually, it's this next slide. Madam President, members of the board, we know that currently our ADM, based on our 40th day, is 11,305. The projection is about 212 students less next year. So you just automatically go from 11,305, and then you get a calculation about $1.2 million. And again, it's in the most simplest form. It does not take inflation into account. So just please know that. It doesn't take inflation. It's just a straight reduction in ADM. The hard part is, which I think goes back to your original question, this year, we expected a decrease of 238, and we're talking about almost 600 students. How do you account for a deeper or a greater decrease than we anticipated? This information is only what we know right now. This information could change in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months on July 1st. That's the biggest challenge I think we have. So I think it's important that this is based on what we know. We know that there's another charter school opening up. I think they anticipate about 1,000 kids. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit 85% of their mark.
Let me ask you a question. So with the loss of ADM, that's a lot of dollars. And my next comment will result in lower dollars. But there's also a reduction in operational costs when you lose students. So have you determined what that is? I could only imagine it's not a lot, but have you done that? Because if I lose a family member in a home, moves out, my operation costs go down, utility costs go down. 200, that's not going to be a lot, but do you calculate that?
Madam President, members of the board, what I would say, and I think the superintendent has talked about it, we've lost enrollment. And if you could go from 2016 to this current year, you're talking shy of 1,600 kids. We haven't really made the adjustments on the staffing proportionate to the loss of ADM. So, to answer your question, the answer would be we should be doing that so that you can obviously reduce your overhead, but in the last several years, we haven't proportionally made staffing changes to align with the lower decrease in enrollment.
So I'm not asking, are we going to make the changes? I'm asking, are we quantifying those, the reduction in expenditures for operational costs, whether it be, even the what ifs, what we were to reduce X amount of staffing, what does that quantify? Utility cost reduction. So I'm not saying act on it, I'm saying have we taken? I think that's going
to be the next step. I don't know how we avoid this conversation without doing what you're suggesting.
And again, the reason why I'm asking is, at some point in time, this is a public meeting, but at some point in time, the community needs to know, the GESD community needs to know, but they want to know everything. Okay, so you lost kids, but you also reduced your expenditure. So they need to know all that, and so it's our job to ask you those questions.
And we agree with it.
We've done it yet, but.
And we agree with that completely. Madam President, members of the board, the loss of students this year is what I would call it, what you would call a structural deficit. If it weren't for that increase in the budget balance carry forward, you would have felt that greater reduction in the budget. And so we need to start addressing that. And I think to Mr. Aldama's point, something's going to have to give. So you take that $3.2, $3.3 million structural deficit, a reduction in the revenue control limit, the M&O override of what would be about 1.2, if it's only 212 students less than what we anticipate. If it's more, it's going to be greater. And that's a difficult projection. Additional expenses, we only described 3. There are others that we probably need to consider, but these are the 3 that we know of right now. You're looking at just shy of $5 million. You're looking at the $4.9 million in what I would call operating expenses, and then just the $92,000 in less district additional assistance in the subsequent year as a result of enrollment. And so that's how you get to the $5 million figure. And again, it could be greater than that. In good faith, I can't tell you what that number is going to be. I can only give you the data as we know as of right now. This next slide is hopefully to just gather my thoughts, share those with you, some of the discussions we've had as a team. And so there are no legislative financial safeguards in place for us. It was only that first year in 17. Decisions must be made for long-term sustainability. The suggestion would be that the M&O budget is not over-committed. You protect revenues and don't overcommit expenses just in future years. Because of current year funding, there's an immediate reduction to budget. So you're feeling it in real time, or as real as possible. We believe that it would be prudent to address the salary and wage compression, and it's only going to get worse with Prop 206. More conservative in budgeting, and the board should consider a minimum budget balance carry forward threshold to protect itself from unknown.
What are your suggestions about a good carry forward threshold? I mean, I know this is a discussion, but your recommendation, since you're the financial person.
Madam President, members of the board, I think it's incremental. I do believe that we need to change how we provide budget to the departments. I think that process needs to change. I think that will allow us to maybe answer that specific question, because to the carry forward issue, right, we thought it was 2.6 and it went up to 4 million. We have to budget tighter. And the tighter we budget, the more predictable the data is. And so I think that's the first step. I think through further discussions and changing the way we operate in fiscal year 20 will allow us to answer that question, and it might be an evolving process. And I think we need to look at where we are with expenses right now, because I do think that is also a concern. I think towards the end of the year, or in the next couple of months, that might give me a better opportunity to come up with a more specific suggestion. But I think certain things need to happen first to come up with that answer. And again, the most difficult thing is, how do you protect yourself when you don't know where that enrollment's going? that's right now the $5 million question.
I think what we've also done throughout from the first 101 days is weekly when we meet, we look at the enrollment. Every week you get that as well to see, you know, are we up or down and what is that? And we've also looked at surrounding districts just to see, is it just us or are there other districts, and trying to get any indication of where these charter schools are and what those correlations are. And in particular, we paid attention to one district in particular because they took the most hit, was at the beginning of the year when we were watching, it was steady hovering around about 800, 900. And then the next time you look, they're at 1,400 kids that they've lost. I mean, that could be 2 or 3 schools. So that's the scary part about the moving target. Right now, we say it's 212 students for next year based off demographic, but that didn't include the new charter school that is being built or the unknown, and we will request information about where those others might be. So is it going to be 212? Is it going to be 412? Is it going to be 1,400? You know, that's the unknown. So when we talk about what are we going to do with budget, I think it's pretty simple. We have to rethink how we do things. For example, I'm not the finance person, but I'm going to put it in what I believe I understand it to be as well, is if you have 212 kids, let's just say it's 212 and we're just going to say that's all. We're not going to lose any more. If we lose just the 212, then we need to go to the tables and talk about what does 212 kids mean in dollars and where does that come from? And I think that's what you're asking, Mr. Aldama. Where does that, you know, what does 212 equate to in our operational expenses? And so that's the next phase for us to look at. We do want to just get the demographers' information to make sure, and then also and then it would be smart of us to take the 212 and decide how much we want to increase it. Let's just say it's not going to be 212, it's going to be 400 and present worst case scenarios if we could predict worst case scenarios. So I think that's the next phase for us. And then think about, you know, how we, departments are allocated money, how schools are allocated money, how we do staffing. Not that you change your whole staffing model, but sometimes what we've done, the staffing model has been truly based off program. You know, we've staffed because of the 4-hour block with the ELL students and the gen ed block, and then we do a staffing based off that. Well, right now, if you're watching in legislation, that there's going to be probably more than likely some major changes to the 4-hour block. So we're going to have more freedom. So that staffing for that is going to look different. And that would be beneficial to us because it won't require as many teachers just in ELL. So that staffing model, we were exploring, what does that look like? Those are kind of the unknowns right now, but I think we have to, really sit down and look at what is worst, perhaps what we think worst case scenario is, and perhaps what best case scenario is. Best case scenario is it's the 212, and then come up with the next phase and then present that.
If I may give a couple of suggestions, and I wrote this down for you speaking. So I got 1, 2, 3. So any organization, any family would immediately stop non-essential spending. Just done eating out, not going to do it no more. So non-essential spending needs to be looked at. Probably you're already thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And then second thing that I would do is right off the top, beginning of the budget process, 5% off immediately. And the third thing I would do is make our departments submit budget requests and identify why you shouldn't be part of the 5% reduction. If we already know, if it's only 212, we already know how much money we have to cut. So those are my suggestions that this district needs to do, and that's any organization would do that. Right off the top, 5%, we'll go from there. And it could be the bus yard may need it and they'll justify it. But it makes us all justify why we should not have that 5% decrease. And at the end of the day, we become a holistic organization that says we're giving back because we have a deficit. But those are just my suggestions off the top, and then just stop non-essential spending quickly and immediately. Then you can also, I know that there's deadlines you guys have when you stop spending. Maybe you need to back those up a little sooner and say, we need to now know how much money we have to get in the end. So, Mr. Bergman, I know that both of you probably already know that, but that's just something that I would suggest.
We appreciate that. There's a lot of things we have to look at as well because we have funding coming from multiple sources. You know, we have funding coming from grant sources, and that's not M&O. So what can we do to, that's going to take some creative thinking because grants has to be used for specific things, and you can't take the grant amount of money and put it in the M&O. So those types of things, those discussions, but it doesn't mean that we can make some reductions in grants so that we can pick up other expenses that are allowable from the M&O. So those are the conversations we have to have. Also, what's so difficult for us when you talk about grants is that, yes, you have to follow what the grant can be used for, but at the same time, with the increase in minimum wage, and that increases how much is coming out of the grant. And also, you have to remember with the grant, when there's a decrease in enrollment, it's a decrease in what you receive in your grant, too. So it's a matter of looking at where do we best use those resources for what they're to be used for, and reduce where we can reduce so that we can put in some of those M&O expenses. It's, so that's going to be those next conversations for us as well. Also, I want to talk about the next thing with this because I am going to be, I know what, you know, obviously there's a decrease. I'm not willing to quit fighting. I want to, we presented to you last board meeting a marketing plan. We met this week with GCU again. Our plan is to the time all students and staff return from spring break that we will have our new image out there into the community, and that's what they'll come back to. And we're going to move into the next part of the presentation is, you know, we pay very much attention to what other districts, and you know, we are saying it's charter schools, and we do believe that, and we will get some data to support that. But also, I don't want to lose our students to any other public school either. And so what is it that we can do that will retain our students, but also get other students to come to Glendale because we believe we are the better district. So we spend a lot of time talking about what we can do and what other types of programs we might be able to provide to our students in our community. You know, this year we provided the 2 dual language immersion schools. I think that's going to help us in the long run, and those will continue. I'm going to let Dr. Peterson and Kravaya take over the next part of the presentation, and he will share some of those next innovations that we want, and we do think that's going to be a strong marketing piece. We have to think about what staffing looks like, particular sites, you know, where do we have the staff that can do these new innovations as well. And I did write down, I think, I'm going to say it in public so that someone can remind me what I said. Ms. Smith said, you know, we have to remember when we're talking about our community, we heard GCU say we just need to speak louder, and that our schools have been here for a long time. And so I think part of that strategy is, you know, we've been, say it's Landmark or pick a school, we've been here 50 years in the community. We need to say that. We need to say that because that does make a difference. And sometimes I didn't think about that, but that number needs to go to that school. We've been here 30 years or 20 years. I think that's important for them to know. We weren't here 2 years and we haven't been shut down. So it's that strategy piece. So remind me, team, that I want that on that marketing piece as well.
Can I just interject real quick? And maybe this was already addressed, but do we know which schools have actually maybe lost the most to maybe possibly a charter school?
Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, we do track on the weekly basis by school. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we do track by school where we're seeing the decrease in enrollment, and that is a factor and part of our discussions as well. In the report that we give you every other board meeting, you'll find it there. So you can just look at the more recent one, and we'll provide you with a more recent one as well. But that's just that's the document that we see and look at every year. Where they're going, I think, is a little difficult. To Mr. Aldama's point, we just know that we're losing them, and then we're seeing this increase within their institutions. But that information at least by school is available.
And then we need to speak to the demographer as well, because how do you count for the kindergarten kids that aren't here, that birth rate kids? We know Jack has taken a decrease and South has taken a decrease, and we know some of our schools, the decrease is in the kindergarten population, and that isn't aligned to what the demographer has said. We don't have those babies yet. So all those things will have to be taken into consideration.
Now, can I just throw something out there? Because I know we're talking about, when we do our rebranding, not only do we want to keep our community students, but we want to also pull students in from outside. That we don't get so fixated. I know we need the numbers and we need the dollars that go with them, but at the same time, I don't want to sacrifice our community kids because we might bring in a child that is just detrimental to what's going to happen in the classroom either.
Well, we have to still go through open enrollment, and we have to do through variances, and there's things that we have to follow by law and by statute we do.
Another thought is, when I have my children, and they've gone through our schools, but they've also gone to the high schools, and so I've had a lot of experience now watching about the different high schools, and we're seeing that the high schools aren't having as much of a problem as the elementary schools, that these children end up going to the high schools. And that may be another thing that we market, is that, if you come to our schools, you're automatically, going into these high schools, and this is what they have to offer, and some of them, I'll just give you one example. So you have your, my kids, your advanced placement tests are free in Glendale. If you go to Peoria, as a parent, you have to pay for them. Mm-hmm. And I think, that if we work with the high schools and find out some of their positives and what they're marketing, that would help us in ours, saying, stay with us because, this is going to be your advantage, if you, move from here, and then your friends are going, your children are going to have friends as they go to high school, and that's important. And so those are, things to really.
Ms. Smith, that's funny you mentioned that, because yesterday, Dr. Peterson and Carvaya and I spent an hour or so with Brian Capistron from Glendale Union High School District, and to start some of those partnerships. We talked about courses and aligning our courses. They are going to do some summer camps and include some of our kids into their summer camps, and it's marketing. We had a great conversation with how do we make that continuum from Glendale Elementary to Glendale High School, because you're right, Glendale High School district is up 400 kids. St. Louis kids are up 400 kids, because when they leave the charter schools, they got to go to high school, and a lot of charter schools are in high school. So we did spend time with Brian. We had some great conversations. We're going to set up a meeting to talk about some of the camps they're offering. We've got some programs, and Dr. Pearson and Carvaya will tell you of those programs or academies that we want to begin next year, which of those will align directly with what we talked about with the high school yesterday. So thank you, and timing is perfect because that just happened yesterday, and we're very excited to work with Glendale Union High School District.
Well, and the reality is most of the charters that open up are K-8.
Mm-hmm.
They're not high school, and the few that are high school, they do graduate. The numbers start out high for freshman year, and
they lose them.
Yeah, they're down to like 45, 50 kids by the time they graduate.
What a great segue. So, Madam President, members of the board, you have a one-pager in front of you about, last year, we're actually ahead of the game compared to last year. Last year, about end of February, we presented to you the idea for the dual language immersion program. And we got that off and running pretty quickly. And so we're a month ahead, so we can breathe a little bit, Ed Service team, about this. But we are really excited to present to you some ideas that I think will innovate and invigorate some of our schools, and hopefully not only bring in enrollment, because I think that's one of the goals, but I think there's so many other goals, providing a unique opportunity for a lot of our students to have access to these kinds of programs. So I think that's really important. And actually, in the meeting that Ms. Sagata-Jones was talking about yesterday with the high school district, they couldn't be more pleased with us coming up with this plan, because they really can see the connection into their schools and the pathway that we can help create for both of us. So there's 5 different innovations, I'll call them, on a sheet of paper. The first innovation is the dual language immersion schools. So those are the ones that we already have in place, and we would continue those two programs at Jack and Horizon and increase it, go up a grade. So the kindergartners would progress to first grade. We would invite more kindergartners in and first graders, because if you remember the presentation that Ms. Castillo did last board meeting, that first grade's okay still for dual language and not having any access to the language prior to that. And then we would just grow that every year thereafter. So that would definitely continue to grow. The exciting thing about that is that I think we found another Spanish teacher today. At
From
the School
Twitter,
Connect.
from Twitter, somebody
From
following
Twitter.
me.
So we will continue that, and that's always exciting. A Career Pathway Academy, and these are not titles or for sure titles of anything. This is rough
Names,
draft
just names.
names. A Career Pathway Academy, so you can see that one school will be identified for this opportunity, and that doesn't mean it'll stop at one school, but we're going to try it on at one school, get it right before we move it on to other schools. We're thinking that it would be a pretty robust program, especially in the 7th and 8th grade, because we'll tie it to the CTE programs, and we talked about that with the high school yesterday. They're the exact CTE programs that it could feed into in Glendale Union, especially the 3 schools that we feed into, primarily Independence, Glendale High, and Apollo. But we didn't want it just to be a 7th and 8th grade program there, that it would be integrated. The exploration would be kindergarten on up, so that when they finally get to middle school, they're getting really in depth into the work that they're doing in middle school and get ready for the high school. So,
And if I may, Dr. Peterson, I have been attending Westmark as well, and the conversations about that is preparing for that workforce, that pipeline, and it's really about exposing students, not just at 7th, 8th grade, or not just at high school, that we really need to start and give children what those career paths look like down at the kindergarten level, so that they have an opportunity over the years while they're in public education to determine, is that really what I want? Sometimes, because we didn't have a lot of choices, your child goes off to college and they decide they're going to do this, and 3 years later they're still not, they're a freshman still because they haven't decided what they want to do, or they graduate and say, you know what, Mom, I think I want to do something different. And so it's really exposing our students to different opportunities, different career paths, so that they have an understanding of what is it I can do. The time they get to high school, they get some of those internships, and then the high schools are now working with business partnerships so that they can do those internships and then guaranteed employment afterwards. And I think that's the bigger picture, as Dr. Peterson and Carvalho said, yes, we want to increase student enrollment, but really it's about providing our students in our community with the best education possible, so that when they are out of high school and they choose a career path, whether that be college or not, that they are skilled in whatever field it is that they choose to do. I think that's what we really are about. It's about, building a stronger community.
I think in our equity webinars that we've been watching too, that they've also been talking about the increased cost of the higher education, and that our community people can't afford this. And so I think that, the career exploration, it's a great idea if they can't go the college pathway, just because of the financial burden that it would place on their families.
Right. Many of the internships now are offering, if you complete through your CT and then you go into these internships, that they now are coming up with funds that they can help support the next step, the next college step for students that want to continue, which is good. There are already organizations that when you do graduate and you have a 4-year degree, if you want to get your master's, they will do that. Humana is known for doing that. So I think the private sector realizes the cost of education, but they need the skilled employee. So what can we do to help them? So those are great things for our community, I believe. I'm sorry, Dr. Peterson.
Oh, no. You can say whatever you want. the important piece with that one is also, and I think with all of these, I just didn't label it on all of them. I think it's something to remember with all of these, and we learned it especially today at School Connect, is that partnerships are going to be key to this because we can't do any of these alone.
Yep.
And so getting our businesses part of it and our other community partners as part of this is really important. And that's assumed within each one of these. We're really going to have to get better about aligning those services so that we can provide everything that we can for our students. The next one is interesting, STEAM Academies, and I say it's interesting because it's, you know, STEM and STEAM, and now even STREAM is, you know, kind of cliquish words that have been used and thrown out there for probably about a decade now. And what's interesting, when you go to a place that might say that they're a STEM school or STEAM or STREAM school, I don't mean to criticize those programs, however, you don't always see very robust programs. You see a lot of, because we offer a STEAM program, they'll just say, well, because we have music 40 minutes every 6-day rotation, it becomes a STEAM school. And well, then we would already be a STEAM school, STEAM district, because we offer something like that, and because we offer math, and we offer, you know, physics within science. You know, STEAM or STREAM is much more involved in that to do it truly in a robust, positive way. And what we would like to do is identify 2 schools to go about it the right way. And to go about it the right way probably means it can't go full force the first year, but it'll need to weave in year by year by year to make sure that it's successful, because you have to have a lot of, the faculty need to be on board. The faculty need to have professional development. The structure of the school needs to maybe change a little bit. We would really like to make sure that the modules or curriculum or resources, however you want to call it, is really integrated throughout the curriculum. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to my science class like they normally would every other day, but it's really integrated. Engineering, design thinking, creative thinking is going into all curriculum areas in every classroom, every grade level, so that when students get to middle school, again at middle school, because a true middle school, more junior high model is that there's exploratories or electives. And being in, you know, coming from Wisconsin where we had true junior highs and high schools, and in a lot of states that's the way that it is. And coming to here where
older people know it too.
K, right? Here to K-8 schools, we've gotten away from that model because you're almost then creating 2 schools on a campus when you're creating your master schedule. But giving students that explore those kinds of thinking and to develop those skills so that they can actually truly choose some sort of elective and or exploratory in the middle school to delve a little bit deeper. And that can be a lot of different things like coding and digital photography and dance, or, you know, the things that we normally wouldn't offer in a general K-8 setting, but that takes professional development. It takes it takes teachers to be on board, the administration to be on board, so we'd have to be very strategic in which schools those would be.
Is there
I see a question or a statement.
Yeah, actually, several. Is there going to be a cost to that? There's going to be an increase for the coding, the digital photography, and...
No, it's all a negative cost. It's free. No, yes. You know, the cost is going to come in mostly the professional development and resources and or equipment that would come with any of that. Most of the funding for a lot of the things that we're talking about today will end up coming from our grant programs. So we have already, for things that are what we already have in place that can help take care of this, and then there's going to be other grants that we need to apply for and help supplement that. But Title I and Title IV now, Title IV is brand new again, it came back. It used to be safe and drug-free schools back in the day, and then there was a Title V, which was innovative programs. Now, that is Title IV, and it mostly like innovative programs. So that's going to help fund some of this, but Title I has become extremely flexible, surprisingly so over the years. We can use it for a lot more things now to supplement the work that we do in our schools.
And in addition, for the professional development of our staff, when we met with the high school yesterday, they do have a coding, at their schools and their teachers, and they're willing to do coding camps for our kids. So if we want kids to have a prerequisite to go into the coding camp, and then their teachers who obviously have been teaching coding can help with some of that PDs, they were very open to that for us, because then our 8th graders would be, it wouldn't be a new exploratory for them in high school. They would have already had 3 years of that, and then they would go into coding at the high school.
And so the after-school academies, the general robotics and Lego League, choir, dance, that's only would be offered at those 2 identified schools, or would other schools be able to, the children be able to participate in those as well?
Yes, we haven't figured that piece out yet, but I think that's a really good idea, to be able to not just limit it to, especially the after-school academies, to just those 2 schools, but figure out how we can offer that more across the district.
And with staff, who's willing to do the staffing piece of it. That's one of the struggles, even with any of these, even with dual language. It's, for example, who is going to be the next Spanish teacher? So those are some of the challenges.
Are there students with GCU that maybe would like to come in after school and do a dance
Or
program?
GCC or GCU.
Yeah, definitely, or ASU West. Yeah, I think that.
I mean, not to take away any kind of stipend for our teachers, because that's a whole nother thing.
And I think it could be a both.
Yeah.
Not a or, it could be we start an offer for our teachers, but it could also be what great professional development than in the moment. Professional development, like we're co-teaching together with the ASU professor, student, or whoever who would be coming in to help partner with us. So that might
Because some of our GCC students come in already. Our schools have partnerships. The Challenger does a really good job with that, with math. Their GCC students come in and help with our math programs, and that's not a cost to us to do. So it's that type of thinking that we can do.
So I remember a few years back, I think it was Sunset Vista had put out a program that they had through West Mick, and for some reason I saw the flyer, and so then I was able to get my son to be able to go over to, I don't remember what it was, I think 3D.
It was the West Bank facility.
We actually, but, I had to drive him over to the West Mick, facility, but I was perfectly, happy to be able to do that, and it was exciting to me to see that they actually, had something different that wasn't offered at my school.
Right.
Do you know what's interesting is, and we heard this from Glendale Union yesterday, excuse me, and Jennifer Johnson today at GCU, is that they're actually starting to now think about that it's not enough to just offer 8th grade camps or 8th grade enrichment activities for 8th graders or even 7th graders. They're starting to really think that it needs to go down into the lower grades, and actually, and they're just, it's interesting because they're like, but it's just starting, this is the first year. But we just found out today GCU is offering a mathematics camp this summer to 2nd and 3rd graders. And that's not something that's typically it's not been done.
Right.
It's not generally something that's been undone from the university level or even the Glendale Union High School District level. Usually they tap into the 8th graders who are becoming 9th graders. And so for them to start talking about making it more, again, I'll use the word pathway, it needs to start before 8th grade or the summer after 8th grade. It needs to start younger than that.
And I don't think we can't forget where we were today, and we had representation from our principals, and they're out there, and we thank them for attending that School Connect today. There are business partnerships out there that we need to tap into. There are great resources out there, and we need to tap into them, and that's something we've not been as aggressive about that we will do.
The next innovation, and you heard about this one through a board update, we received the Verizon Digital Promise Grant. It was an extremely long process, and we got it. And what that grant does for 2 of our schools, Sign and Challenger, and it would be focused on 4th through 8th grade, and I mentioned that specifically because they actually were saying that it was only middle school, and I was like, it's Challenger Middle School, it's 4th through 8th grade, and they're like, no, that's not really middle school, and I was like, it's called Challenger Middle School, it's 4th through 8th grade, so then I said, so then Sign is 4th through 8th grade too, and they went with it. So a lot of people helped though make this happen, and I appreciate the work of the 2 principals and those people from my team for helping get us this grant. But one of the selling factors and the marketing factors with these 2 schools that we can use is that every 4th through 8th grade student gets a device that they get to take home.
Now, they're not going to put their big boards up all over the place.
And they have a lot of marketing that goes with it, but we do have a say in that.
Oh, good,
So it's
that-
not just what they want,
At
but they.
Cartwright, we used to refer to Harris as Verizon North, and Borman was Verizon South.
But they've been very, I think they've learned from, we would be cohort 6, I believe. And so I think they've learned every single cohort because when I've asked for things so far, they've been willing to work with us. So I definitely would want to make sure that it's a collaborative process with them. But it's really exciting. Our principals are really excited about it. Our teachers are excited. It gets more professional development to our teachers. And it really talks about innovative technology into academics. The other thing, and we just talked about this yesterday, but as you know, at Challenger, there's a makerspace room. And that is an exciting room with some really complex thinking that goes on in that room. I see Russell looking over here. I'm hoping I'm saying the right words. He's the biggest champion of it. And we would like to model that or parallel that same thing at Sign as well, so that people have access to that. Get on that, Russell. So but that's one thing that I think it's not starting from the ground, grassroots with something like that. That's an example of a grant that actually provides so much that we've now tapped into, that now we can use in our marketing campaign, because not every school can say that. So that's really exciting. The last one is also exciting, and that is we would like to identify one school to become an accelerated academy. And why, and it's very specific about why I use the words accelerated academy, not because it's called that or that it would be called that, but I would advocate that we don't just focus on only gifted identified students, but students who are highly intelligent and who are highly capable students as well. And so what we would suggest with that, because that's a little more strategic and targeted to set up a school that way, what I would suggest, and this would be advocated by Glendale Union as well in our conversation yesterday, is that we start at a 7th and 8th grade level with that, because we already have in place a couple mechanisms or structures that already feed into the high school with our math course taking. So our algebra and geometry courses are already high school credited. You're able to get high school credit through those courses, and they're aligned, and it is the high school curriculum that we use, and we're trained to use that. What we're recommending is that we use the curriculum at this school in the ELA classrooms called AP Springboard. AP Springboard, Advanced Placement or College Board. College Board is the people who are in charge of advanced placement across the nation. And they have created a pre-AP curriculum for 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th that you would take that aligns you to AP coursework in high school. And so You might have heard of like the Cambridge curriculum or International Baccalaureate curriculum. This is one of those same kinds of curriculums, but it's targeted for AP course taking. And as you know, in Glendale Union, and we got confirmation yesterday, because we asked Superintendent Capistran point blank, are you planning to do IB or AP, continue AP or Cambridge in the future, because we want to align with you. And we want to build that pathway. And he's like, we're staying with AP. And they're an AP district, so, and nationally recognized for that. So we're really excited about that. I got to see that, actually that curriculum in place in Clark County when I was in Las Vegas for those 9 months, that you may remember. But really successful things going on with that curriculum, and got kids really ready for that high school AP curriculum. And that's where I would suggest we start, or we suggest that we would start with there and get it really tight and strong, and then extend it back and across more curriculum. So from there. But those are our ideas and brainstorms of our innovations for this year.
I think when you do that accelerated academy, that I have some very good students that came from our schools and that took the AP classes that may give you some insight of like what has helped prepare them or what didn't prepare them for those classes when they went to high school, now that they're college students. You know, so and they'd be very good at helping us transition through that also.
Through that.
So what kind of things are you looking at when you go to decide on the schools?
I'll talk about two specific ones because I think they're probably the highest leverage reasons, perhaps. And one of those is not demographic, geography. And geography combined with where our students are being pulled from. We know we have a school in the western part of our district that has a very high open enrollment number. And it's right on the edge of 2 other districts and close to some charter schools. And we're nervous that we're gonna lose, up to 200 kids just if a charter school opens up like right there. And they're talking about it, about opening a charter school around there. So that's gonna obviously go into the decision or identification. I think some other things have to go into it. Leadership, leadership matters. You have to have a champion of somebody who really believes in it and wants to see it move forward on their campus so that they can champion that with their staff. Staff is part of it. Are there structures in place already at a school that lends itself to easily implement it and hit those other things I've already talked about? That would be great. Are there partnerships already in place that lends itself to easily implementation of a program like that? I think all of those have to go into consideration when we do that. But I think that there will be obviously challenges with every single one of them, but we have to be ready, and a lot of it's professional development. Because I don't think you'll ever get anybody, whether it's an administrator or a teacher or staff member, say no to something like this, because it's pretty exciting. And people are excited about invigorating programs, but they just want to be trained, and they want the support to make it happen in the right way, because they want to do the right thing, and they want to do it well. And so we have to help them do it in that manner.
Do you think there'll be some movement of staff due to some having more strengths in some areas than others?
Yes. Yes. And it didn't really happen with dual language, because dual language was assumed within the current structure of those 2 schools. But when you're talking about a STEAM school, and you're talking about it being school-wide, if you have, and I'm not thinking of any specific school or any specific staff member, but if you have a media literacy teacher who really does, or a visual art teacher who's like, digital photography, no way. Or
Right.
coding, no way.
Right.
And that's the person we need to tap into. Maybe that's part of like the transfer process or what we do to help them find a place that they feel comfortable in. That would have to be part of that discussion, I'm sure.
So you're looking to roll these out next year?
Yeah,
So for the staff that wants to move, you probably have to identify those schools soon.
that's why we're presenting it today. A month ahead of time compared to last year. Because we do need to have those discussions pretty quickly. Because we don't want to surprise people either. I'll use the media literacy example again. I would not want a media literacy person to find out at the end of February that they're becoming a STEAM school and the transfer process closed at some point or some sort. So,
Or for those that want to go in.
exactly. Or welcoming the people who want to transfer into that. Yeah, exactly.
And are we gonna try to spread this out? And what I mean by that is, it looks like we have 4 schools already identified specifically, one with a dual language, one with the innovative learning academies, and then that's another 4 that we are looking to identify. So I'm just gonna pick a school here, Jack. So I'd like to know that we're not gonna put 3
Another-
programs at
yeah.
Jack.
No.
Jack. Oh,
And
Absolutely not.
completely.
we're gonna be
No.
spreading the wealth, so to
Yes.
speak.
In our discussions, nothing would overlap. Currently, nothing would overlap.
And we were strategic when we did Jack and Horizon too. We knew where the charter school was
Right.
at Jack. That's why it went there, and we had a great champion there. Janice and Alicia have been wonderful, as well as the staff, and the same with Horizon. It was strategic because we knew that they were pulling from that area as well. And so a lot of thought goes into that, and that will occur with these as well. Eventually, you would want every school to have some specialty, and we can get there. But also, we have to remember, how much can we also take on? Because it's a lot to pull pull that off across the district. But we're confident it can be done, and we're excited about it really, because it's who doesn't want that for their kid?
Absolutely. Well, that's exciting.
Is there something we could do now? I mean, I'm thinking about Mr. Cummings and his big department over there that he has to help market us, but, you have this, he did such a good job with that video on the dual language immersion, and it's really a great marketing thing, and it was shared a lot, and I saw that it was shared and it was viewed quite often. And then you're talking about that innovative learning academy that we have at Challenger. I would think, wow, what a great, nice video, and another testimonial from parents that could get out there. That's something that we already have, and then just whatever these schools, all these schools have something, unique, and I would hope that we're going to.
That's all part of the marketing plan with GCU as well.
Yeah, I would hope that we're tapping into what we already have in place and not saying, oh, this is a beginning program, because we do have some wonderful things going on in all of our schools that I would love to promote a little bit better when you said that we need to shout a little bit louder about what we have.
I
Absolutely.
think that, and incorporating more of our parents too, because parents listen to parents. Look at how many times that video's already been shared. You've got 2 parents in there talking about what great stuff is happening with their kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I would like to see a little bit more of that type of marketing also in our district.
And all the graphics that were shown, Mr. Cummings, they were his. They weren't GCU's. Those were all our kids, all our communities, our community. So he does a wonderful job at that. And that's what we want. We don't want anything that's not representative. You always see something out there, videos that, they're not their children.
Yeah.
All those are our children, and that's what we want.
I just think this is so exciting, and I'm glad that, we're looking at how can we compete with the charter schools, because this is really, going to give them a run for their money. There's no doubt that people move their kids over to charters for these reasons. And, what do they have to offer that, public schools are not offering?
Absolutely.
So that, you've all done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be a big plus for GES.
I just wish it would have happened about 18 years ago. When my kids were still in elementary school.
Grandbabies,
But I'm glad
grandbabies, grandbabies.
No, I don't want those.
But I just, and for your grandbabies and Jamie's and everyone else has grandbabies, this is exciting. And for all of our 11,000 and growing number, I'm really excited for those kids.
Well, I think today we had a lot of information thrown at us, and so one of the things that we had discussed on here was our board retreat and a policy, and we can go into our policy manual review, a little bit different type of a topic. So I guess we can let Ms. Sagata-Jones talk about our policy manual reviews, and then we can go back into the board retreat discussion in just a little bit.
The policy manual review, as I've stated and you've seen in the board updates, that we have many of our policies are not up to date, and we are beginning to finish those. The executive team, we are on our last binder. We are referring to them as binder 1, 2, and 3. So we are on binder 3. So all those revisions, we've gone through all the policies, we've made the revisions, so they need to come to the governing board. So the recommendation through ASBA is that you do them, first of all, you have to, what is the word, repeal? We have to repeal or suspend or repeal all of the old ones and then bring in the new ones. And they recommend that you do that in chunks because there's a lot of them. And that you might have a 30-minute study session to go through 8 policies prior to a board meeting, because some of the policies, it's real quick, some of them will take more time. So we could do that. We could provide you in the executive updates which policies that would be coming up in the next board meeting. You could review those, do a quick 30-minute, perhaps, study session prior to the board meeting, just for any clarifying questions, and then go into, and then just tackle them. Our hope is we want all those done as quickly as possible, and because the next piece then with that, and I've been saying that since I've been here, Jerry and I, the next piece are the DSOPs. We need to get the DSOPs. The DSOPs, we attempted to start doing, we did a lot of work on those, but then when the policies weren't aligned, it stopped. So once we get the policies aligned, then the next phase is to get those DSOPs. And it truly is my goal to try to get all that done. The policies, no doubt, will be done before the end of the school year. And when school starts, I really want to have those DSOPs in place for our staff as well. And Jerry's dying over there. I have this notebook, and I handed it to him the other day, and it said, what? Make it happen. But, hey, I will take on DSOPs because it's just been a pet peeve of mine, and it's going to happen. So, but that I would recommend, if the board would like to, that's the approach we take, because there's several policies we need to go through.
So are we okay for our next so-called
Several
meetings?
months.
Yeah, for the rest of the school year, that we either start with a study session or that we start a little bit earlier. What is your preference? Like, we start at 5, or do we just start at 5:30 still and then do 30 minutes of a study session and then go to our regular meeting? Thoughts?
I think, should we take a look at how long the meeting's going to be, the regular board meeting, how long that agenda is? So maybe that ought to be a factor as to if we start earlier, just on time.
So Mary Ann,
I can make it happen.
what?
I can make it happen.
So-
For me, personally.
Well, so can we just have these sent to us individually? 'Cause we really can't have discussion on the policy as a whole before we're gonna vote.
Well, that's why we
No,
want
the
to
study
do, that's why we
session.
want to do
You
a
can.
study
Study
session, that we could discuss them, prior to our meeting, if we really have
So
a
it's
lot
like
of.
a meeting before the other meeting.
What's your
I'd
preference?
rather just on my own time go through them, but it's more efficient the other way. I'm fine
I think we do it at least the first 2 meetings and just play it by ear, see how it goes, and then that way we know.
I think
if
it's going to
there's-
go quicker than we think.
Yeah,
Pretty cumbersome.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, but some of them there aren't major changes.
Right.
And then there are some of them that are major changes. Mr. Berrigan, you're behind, get up with speed, you're slow. It's not that you haven't had other things to do.
I'm just gonna smile.
Don't worry, Ms. Valadez has the next, binder 3 is all of hers, so it'll be all right. We're ready.
So we'll get it started at 5 then instead of
Yeah.
5:30?
I think in 30 minutes you can get through quite a few policies. And we can get those to you in the executive updates ahead of time.
In the board update?
Okay.
so then if we had like, let's say you're talking, just generically like 8 policies per meeting. Well, if there's a larger chunk of real simple itsy bitsy changes, then can we put more of them in there so we get through
Yeah.
it faster?
So we can, Ms. Powell and I will go through those that we think will just be fairly quick. And then the ones that have a lot of changes, then obviously they'll take a little bit more time. But I think the process will go fairly quickly. It has for us, really, the team. We've been really good. I read them and they have 1 week to read them and then we go back. So it's been fairly quick.
And then one of our other things on here was having a board retreat. And you can tell me what your opinions are about a board retreat. But tonight we had a lot of information dropped on us about our financial states. And it may be a good thing for us as a board to have further in-depth discussions about the processes in the future, about the things that we need to do, about things that should be cut, so are we good about having a board retreat, which it's a little bit, lengthier, and then maybe we could put some of those, heftier policies in this retreat too, instead of just doing them just as a study session and just having, a time where we can just go through some things and just get some
Real work done.
real work done. Anyone?
I'm okay with the retreat for budget, as long as it's a dive in deep, you can get into the weeds and really work meat and potatoes. If it's just an overview, again, I shouldn't say it again, because today was really informational. But really dig in deep and get some work done. I'm willing to put Saturday into it, but
Okay.
I just don't want to.
Are we looking at dates already?
Well, we can in a minute, yeah. So now if you're going to want to have a retreat and get into the weeds, so what type of, would you want to just give us a list of weed things you want to get into?
Well, I'm talking about budget.
Right.
Like, what does this administration want us to focus on, and what is your plans, and, our suggestions and how we get there?
I think the next step is for us to present phases to you of how we balance the budget. How do we take care of the 5 million deficits? That's our next step, and we're prepared.
So that's one phase, then that one Saturday retreat we really need to get a lot of work done. One phase can't be multiple Saturdays or
No.
multiple retreats. In fact, we have to work done.
When I speak of phases, I think of it as this is what it is for 1920, the phase that we would do, and what it would look like for 2021 school year. So, but all that can be presented to you. We've already begun to do that, and all that can be presented to you in a Saturday retreat. Because also, as you know, we've got to make staffing decisions, all those things, and so we're on a quick timeline as well. We have to make some adjustments.
So then how soon are we looking at doing this retreat?
Well, not this Saturday because there's a job fair.
Oh, good.
So we need to look at the next when we can. So our job fair is the 2nd.
Yep.
Is it the 26th? I'm on the wrong, I have no concept of time right now, 26th.
Hold on. 26th, I have not.
Well, no, 26 is not.
That's
gonna be an option.
our job fair.
Maybe February 2nd, because I celebrate Groundhog's Day. I have a huge barbecue.
That's what I was looking at, the 2nd.
I know. Could be Groundhog.
You're like my kids. If I just sit there and look at you, you're going to lose it and start laughing.
I would recommend,
Take my-
I'm going to bring that movie. February 9th, I would recommend not that Saturday because that's the chocolate fair and we will be represented as a district at a chocolate fair. And I think some of us at this table are working that chocolate fair that day. So I would recommend not that day. But
16th, there's a training in here.
Well, we can,
we
Well, 23rd, I'm not available.
I'm not.
It's in the afternoon.
staffing February 11th.
I'm not here the 16th.
You're not here on Groundhog
The
Day?
16th.
Oh, the 16th.
It's a long weekend.
No, yeah, we wouldn't do that then.
23rd?
is the 2nd too early?
I can't do it, I can't,
Okay, so the chocolate fair day, we can go in the evening.
Because it's
It's all day,
till
10
10
p.m.
Oh, okay.
We'll go at night. We'll be exhausted and we'll go eat chocolate. How's that?
Well, how
Which
long
Saturday is
are you
that?
planning on
Yeah, how long?
how long is this going to be? A couple hours?
6 hours.
What? No, it's,
See, oh,
Put the sweatshirt on the sleeves.
6 hours and 2.
I mean, what time you plan on starting? What do you plan on ending?
I don't think it would take more than 3 hours for this, for the next phase of the budget. I think that would be sufficient time.
So 9 to
To
12?
9 to 12
On the night.
9 to 12?
on the night.
8?
8 to 11?
Yeah.
On a-
I have a cookie
I
booth.
know I'm retired, but I
I
still
like
like
8
to
to
sleep
11, just get
in
it
every
done.
day.
Instead of the rest of the day, rather than, oh, I'm sorry, Liz.
Oh, you know what?
Did you see my?
10 meetings coming out. Be up that early.
Matter of fact, it might have to be, I forgot, I watched the Girls until about 9 or 9:30.
Okay, what do you guys want to agree on? I'm the one that doesn't sleep, so I'm okay. Whatever time you tell me, I'll be
Like
here.
8 to 11.
I won't be able to be here till maybe 9 or 9:30.
I'm the most flexible.
Okay, 9:30 then.
9:30? Sorry.
I might not be there, but okay.
I mean, I can,
Well, yeah, it's just, look, I don't get weekends off. I mean, it's hard, but weekends are gold for me nowadays, so. But that's fine, just go ahead and I'll put it in. We'll make it happen.
I can double check it. I mean, we can always change it and move it up if he can go in later.
Okay.
If his staff works until 8:39, and then he goes in at 8.
So 9:30 tentative, but if
If he
able to
can-
go for 8.
If he can go in at 10, then yeah.
Okay.
I'll put in 8, and then I'll talk to him.
Okay.
We're doing 8 o'clock on the night.
Here?
Yes.
Just drop off all the kids at my house. Yeah. I won't be there.
I might need it.
Lydia always asks for play dates.
Okay. So those were the study session items, correct?
Okay. Is there anything else that anyone want to discuss about any things brought up today? Okay. So we can go future meeting and events. Anything else to bring up?
We needed to discuss March 28th, the special meeting, if we need that, and we're at NSBA. So do we want to do that telephonically?
Because the week before is spring break, huh?
Uh-huh. And right now, I can have executive team go back and we'll discuss on Tuesday if there's any agenda items that have specific timelines that, the concern I have, there's a spring break and then we don't meet for a while. So let us go back, my team, let's go back and look to see if there's anything that we can move prior, and if that's the case, then there wouldn't be a need to have that board meeting.
Well, even if we did have to have it, if there's a possibility to maybe do it on Monday, even if it's telephonic.
Yeah, if we have to, we can do it telephonically. And we'll go back and check if there's anything that,
Madam President and board members, I know with meet and confer, we have an end of March deadline according to policy, and our last meet and confer meeting's March 13th, where we're supposed to present to the board before the end of March, as well as the contracts for admin. We're thinking, I have to look at my timeline there, if that's April, before April 15th, definitely, but
right.
I don't know that time offhand, but I know for meet and confer, we have to present before the end of March.
So would you present at the 14th?
Our last meeting is March 13th,
And we
so it'd have to be.
And 15th, our district's on spring break.
have a board meeting the 14th, so. Huh?
The 7th.
You don't know?
Date that was approved, I'm good with that, the 14th. There wasn't a reason for the 7th? I don't think so.
I don't have it marked down, so. Huh.
Well, this calendar has it on the 7th, the
Yeah, I
one,
don't
so
know.
yeah. So
I don't know why.
This maybe, no, our spring break's
Maybe
always
it's
that
the-
week.
Yeah, spring break's always that week. I don't know.
Well, let's move the 7th meeting to the 14th. And is the 14th, it's going to be kind of hard to present the next day.
You know, the group so far has been very good that we already added time to meet and confer, Madam President. We already extended our time from 4 to 6:30, and the group realized the amount of time we had left and the work to be done. So I think as it got a little closer, if we realized we have to have everything done the 13th for the 14th, and we have to do something in between there, the group was willing to do that before. And I have a meeting next week, and we can just let them know. We have to have it ready to present on the 14th.
So then what's listed on here on the 7th? Because you've got listed on our calendar suggested dates.
I don't know.
And salary recommendations was on that 7th meeting. So I don't.
But I don't know why. They're, because they have to present by the end of March. I don't know why it was March 7th.
That maybe was just a typo.
Yeah,
Okay.
just brought forward last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so do the 14th, the presentation.
Spring
Okay.
break starts the 18th, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need. The 14th.
Need anything on the 28th? I don't know when you guys are you going to be in Philadelphia on that Thursday?
I'm traveling on the 27th.
What about you, Mary Ann?
I'm going on the 28th.
So if needed, we could still do a telephonic one from Philadelphia if needed.
I don't know if we can facilitate that with our, because somebody hold a meeting in public.
Yeah, somebody has to hold a meeting. Well, yeah, we have to think about that. Let's just go back as executive team, make sure, are there truly any items that we have to have? And then we'll adjust from there.
Right. Anyone have any agenda item requests? No? All right. So we can just go to a superintendent report.
Yes, Madam President. Just quickly, things going on this week. We did attend our principals, thank you, and some of our assistant principals. Where were we?
School Connect.
School Connect. School Connect today. I tell you, School Connect today, and it was great, and so we do appreciate that and got some great ideas. Also this week, we had American, Discovery, Coyote Ridge, Sunset Vista, North Smith, Menzendick, Landmark, and Burton. They all had students at the Stand Up and Speak, so we were excited about that. And then we had several of our schools are at Thunder Vision, our 7th and 8th graders this week, so that's happening as well. So we're very excited about those opportunities our students are getting, and continuing to get out there and work with the community and visit classrooms the best that I can, and be back on track with that. And look forward to all the new exciting things I think are going to happen. Even though it's difficult for us with declining enrollment, I'm going to be very optimistic that we are going to try to increase that, and the great programs that we are going to bring to Glendale and really put us on the map. You did see my tweet and my email that we are on the map with All Things PLC as an All Things PLC district, the only district in Arizona. And you can scream out there, you guys all earned it. My goodness. Teachers and principals, be proud of yourselves. You worked very hard. The next piece is to get All Things PLC schools. We want schools to apply so their schools can be model schools for the nation. That's quite an honor. So we're very excited, and we do appreciate the work that our teachers have done. And also, we can't forget our students. Our students are the reasons that we are on that map. So we need to thank them as well. And that's it.
I'm ready.
All right, I need a motion to reconvene to public session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all